We're rolling. Welcome to the House Dudes podcast, where we invite you to follow us on our journey towards financial freedom using the power of real estate. I'm Jack Haas.
And I'm Josh Koth. Here at House Dudes, we believe in a couple key principles. Number one, the best way to retain information is by teaching it to others. And number two, a rising tide lifts all boats. We're not competitors, we're a community. So let's get into some real estate investing.
Well, we have Rob Stevens on the line with Avalara MyLodgeTax. And you told me I was going to maybe trip that thing up. So
You did great.
Well, I really appreciate your time, but as always, I'm going to just throw it to you, Rob, regarding your introduction.
Yeah, sure. So I'll try to keep it brief. So I'm the co-founder and general manager of Avalara MyLodgeTax. It's actually a company I started a long time ago, over 15 years ago, and I started it because I was a short-term rental operator myself. I purchased a second home in Vail, Colorado, because I'm a big skier, and was fortunate with my brother-in-law and wife. We threw in together and purchased it, but started renting it. We needed the income to rent it, and so we started using these short-term rental sites. Back in the day, was VRBO or Verbo was really the big one, and it was so this is 2002, 2003. We're really effective actually using those online sites, generating a lot of rent. But by doing that, we realized there's a bunch of other stuff that goes along with it, like communicating with guests, collecting money, rental agreements, cleaning services, and then sales and occupancy taxes was one of the things we stumbled across, and wasn't necessarily straightforward. So we were having a great experience with the short-term rental activity, but there was some extra work to do, and we our view was these lodging taxes are a real blind spot for people. So it's through that experience we started this company in 2003, which we subsequently sold the company to Avalara in 2015, and now we're really the lodging tax division or business unit, if you will, within Avalara. So that's a little bit of the background on how we got started.
Sure. It's kind of an interesting conversation because like I said, we've had quite a few people, based in our market. We don't have a ton of short-term rentals because you could, I don't know if you realize this, but I am near Fargo, North Dakota. So, I don't get a lot of tourist traction up in Fargo, but we do still have quite a few people who have tried the Airbnb thing because we have a lot of service-oriented and large corporations in Fargo.
Sure.
So it kind of makes sense for those type of business travelers.
Yeah.
But in the end, I can imagine, how do you wrap your mind around all of the local lodging tax and regulatory requirements? Because that's getting down to a pretty micro level.
Yeah, I mean that's where we have a whole team of people and resources committed to tracking and staying on top of those rules. And to your point, we've identified over 5,000 different jurisdictions, meaning cities, counties, and obviously states. There's only obviously 50 states, but when you get to the city and county level, you have hundreds and thousands of separate cities and counties with their own hotel occupancy tax rules and rates and all that. So yeah, it's a pretty vast set of requirements when you look at the U.S. But that's what we've been doing it for a long time, and we have tens of thousands of customers. We work with very small customers. We work with very large customers like Expedia and VRBO and some of the big brands in the short-term rental space. So over years and years, we've developed an expertise and put a lot of resources on staying on top of these rules, really on behalf of our customers to make this, the goal is obviously to make this very simple for them, let them very successfully rent, whether that's in the short-term rental market or to your point, 30 days or 60 days or 90 days, depending on what the market is, but take away this one kind of back office headache and make that go away for them.
Sure. I can imagine that this is something that a lot of people kind of miss. We're when we're dealing with rental properties, it's in comparison, it can be fairly straightforward. But when you're dealing with these short-term rentals, you have a whole nother round of lodging regulation and taxes that is probably just not on people's radar.
Yeah, Jack. I mean, that is an excellent point. I mean, we've been doing this for quite a while. You know, like I said, we started the company in 2003. I think, for years and years, short-term rentals, certainly in beach markets and ski towns, it's known. I think people have used that type of accommodation, but I'd say it's only been in the last 5 years or so where there's this sense that, with Airbnb and Vrbo, that these short-term rentals are really ubiquitous, and it's really grown a lot. But what's happening, like a lot of things in the world, you've got this disruptive model that technology enables for hosts or homeowners or property managers to very easily connect through these big platforms to travelers.
Mm-hmm.
So it's disruptive, and it's a new way to do it. But like I said, with my experience, it brings on a whole set of requirements if you're doing this yourself. One of these being the lodging taxes. And I think to your point, the layperson is just not familiar with this. And our experience is the average person doing this, especially when they start, thinks, well, I'm just renting my property. They don't have really any awareness of that they need to collect the same taxes as a hotel, or they need to be registered and licensed in the city and county they operate. So yeah, I mean, again, for years it was off the grid, but I think as the short-term rentals have become kind of ubiquitous, they're in every community now, and lots of communities are debating this. How do we regulate and manage short-term rentals? That it has become a big issue. But to your point, historically, that's probably the biggest challenge we've seen from our customers and for people doing this. They're just not aware of these requirements very often.
Well, I would guess, and I'm going to say I'm probably going to be one of them. I mean, you have platforms like Airbnb and where you just assume that those platforms are taking care of it or providing you that advice, and it's not typically the case. They're just there as a platform to connect your place to their platform to the customer. I mean, they're not in the position to help them at this level.
Yeah, exactly. But that's another thing that's really changed, especially over the last couple of years. So you're spot on. Historically, these platforms held themselves out as just advertising venues or marketplaces. Their whole job was to connect, a property owner or manager with the traveler. And when it came to the transaction, they really tried to stay out of that, and all the kind of the legal things or baggage like taxes that goes along with the transaction, they would stay out of it. And that's between the property owner or the manager and the traveler. But over the last couple of years, on a lot of fronts, the platforms, I think a lot of it has to do with trying to make the marketplace easier and more secure. They've actually been much more proactive. And on the tax side in particular, Airbnb is now paying tax in most states, North Dakota included. Airbnb and HomeAway embarked on a similar program, I would say, in the last couple of years, and now pay taxes in a lot of states across the U.S. as well. So the platforms have really kind of jumped into the space, trying to do more. What a lot of people don't understand, though, is very often they'll pay the state taxes, but in the hotel and lodging world, there's often city and county taxes that go along with it, and they're very often not paying those taxes. So, it's almost in some sense getting more confusing that Airbnb and Vrbo are paying some of it, but not all of it, and hosts and homeowners are still obligated to deal with some of the taxes. But the environment is definitely changing.
Yeah, well, with any of these disruption platforms, I mean, look at Uber, and they're fighting the local governments on different things and the unions and what have you. I can imagine that with any of these disruptive platforms, the regulations and trying to keep up on this stuff, I mean, it's got to be changing, and the current trends associated with it it's got to be changing all the time.
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely spot on. I mean, these rules and Uber, I think, is a good example. In our case, in the lodging or the short-term rental world, and we and when we started the company, I've read a lot of statutes and ordinances across the U.S. and these things were all written, 30, 40, 50 years ago. They were all designed to tax, to regulate and monitor and tax, hotels, inns, bed and breakfasts, there was no concept, right? There was no internet. There was no concept of these, home sharing models or technology that would enable just regular people with a home or a spare room to toss it on the internet and pretty easily reach a guest and generate bookings. And obviously, these were written a long time ago. Nobody was thinking the implications of these models. So, and I think that's what's happening, not just with lodging, but some of these other models, is you now have kind of empowered people to do this directly. You don't need a middleman or a corporation or a corporate entity to do it. So you've enabled people to do it, but well, then how do all these rules, regulations apply to people? And I think, in lodging, I think we're figuring that out. There's an active debate across the U.S., but that's, to your point, that's the evolution of this new marketplace.
Mm-hmm. So can you, we talk about income taxes and lodging taxes, and can you kind of break it down a little bit for people? As you probably know, we used to also be known as the REI rookies, and so we have a lot of newer listeners. So could we break down a little bit, like what are some of the differences between standard income taxes and lodging taxes and a few other concepts there?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a common question. That goes back to the confusion. I think, the common person, we're all familiar with income taxes, right? We all have to, at the end of the year, compile our information, do it ourselves, TurboTax, our accountant, whatever. We all are familiar with the annual process of filing income taxes with the IRS. And then most states, there's a similar state income tax filing at the state level. But that's a once a year filing, and you get all your income, and then you've got deductions, whether that's mortgage interest or charitable contributions, whatever it may be, and kind of the net amount is taxable. And again, it's a once a year filing. Very different than sales and lodging taxes. These are what we'd call transactional taxes. So it's a tax on the rent that's collected on these transactions. So if you're charging a guest $1,000 for the weekend, these taxes are typically 10, 12, or 15%. So that's a tax on the total transaction, and we call it a gross receipts tax. So unlike income tax, there's no deductions. There's no, it's actually, the calculation is pretty simple. It's what the total amount you're charging the guest in rent times whatever the tax rate is, 10 or 12%. And then, the complexity really is then that tax needs to be paid usually monthly. And it's usually paid to multiple different agencies, meaning it goes to a state agency and a city agency, sometimes a county agency, sometimes all three. So where income taxes are kind of a once a year income less expenses, sales and lodging tax, it's a transactional tax paid monthly to state, city, and county governments, has nothing to do with the IRS. And it's a tax on the total rent, and there are no deductions. And again, like I said, our typical customer, especially when they join, may have been under the impression that they or their accountant were handling this as part of the income tax process, which is certainly not the case.
Sure. So what can you give us some tips on how to stay compliant when it comes to these type of things?
Yeah, I mean, I always, I speak at different conferences, in front of audiences, whether that's kind of the host or the rent by owner crowd or property managers. And I always tell people, if you're getting the short-term rental business, and I think, look, if you have a property, it's getting easier and easier to do. I think these platforms are making it easier and easier, and it's really effective. But when you get to, there's just some housekeeping things you need to take care of when you do this. Tax is one of them. I encourage people to be proactive. So, I tell people, if you want to do this yourself, based on where your property is located, you need to research the requirements with the state, county, and city. Usually there's not all three agencies involved, but sometimes there is. But I always tell people, start with the state, do internet research, same with the city. It's your city finance office. At the state level, it's Department of Revenue. Do some internet searches, find out what you think the tax rate or the requirements are. And then I always say, pick up the phone and call them to confirm that what you're reading online and how you're seeing it and how you're thinking about it is indeed the same as what the rules are. And then once you figure it out, you have to register and fill out some application forms to either get a license or register to pay sales tax or hotel tax in whatever your particular city, county, or state where your property is located. And the internet, the websites have become increasingly they become better and better and more effective to use. But you do need to be diligent and check these different websites and call these folks. And it's not always necessarily straightforward. And certainly that's the business we're in. To the extent people don't want to deal with this for a $20 per month subscription, that's what we do. Is we'll tell you exactly what the rates are, deal with all the forms, tax filing, making sure it's all done accurately and correctly.
Sure. Well, I'm going to change the topic on you a little bit, since you've had so much experience with, other people's rental type portfolios, and it sounds like your own. There's a lot of interest in people getting into some sort of short-term rentals. Do you have any tips or advice on how to automate or make some of that run more smoothly?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, my first recommendation is always, if you have a second home, or maybe people have a long-term rental and are thinking, boy, can I make more money in the short-term rental market, or people are purchasing a home. I mean, I think the first decision is, do I want to try to do this myself, or should I hire a property manager? So that's a personal decision based on, some people don't have the time to manage the property themselves. So there's a lot, depending on where you are in the U.S., there's different management company options. And for a lot of people, that's a great option that don't have the time or inclination to deal with all these details themselves. And that's a great way just to, you will pay management company fees, but it's a great way to do it if you don't have time and want to be hands off. If you're doing it yourself and you have the interest and the aptitude to do it yourself, then I always recommend use the big rental platforms, Airbnb, Vrbo, and depending on where you are, Airbnb may be more effective for that city versus VRBO or vice versa. But use the big platforms. They're going to get you bookings. Yes, they do charge transaction fees, but I think it's well worth it. And anymore, they're only going to charge you a fee. It's transactional based if they get you a booking. And increasingly, these websites have a lot of the tools that you're going to need. For instance, they collect all the money through their payment systems. Taxes, actually, you can you list your tax rate on there, and they'll collect the tax as part of the transaction. They have email and communication tools. So the big platforms like Airbnb and Vrbo are increasingly make it easier and easier. We're certainly available for the regulatory and lodging tax part of it. And I always encourage people. The other part of it is kind of the record keeping, accounting. QuickBooks is a great option. Depending on how capable people are in Excel, Excel even works. I usually tell people, like, if you just have one property, don't overthink it. Keep it simple. Use the systems that work for you, whether that's QuickBooks or just keeping a spreadsheet. But again, use the big platforms. They'll get you bookings, plus have tools that you need to help make it easier.
We know of the big players in this market. Are there some up and comers that we might not have on our radar yet?
Yeah, kind of a two-part answer. The big players, I think there's been consolidation, or the big players have become so big that they really dominate the space. I mean, it's really, Airbnb, HomeAway, VRBO, which are the same company. TripAdvisor has a short-term rental brand called Flipkey, and then Booking.com is really the other big one. They're very big in Europe, but they're also getting big and increasingly large here in the U.S. So those are the big sites people use. The second part of my answer, after that, then it gets very regional. Then it gets to, if you're on the Jersey Shore, there are local Jersey Shore sites. If you're in, wine country or Sonoma, California, there are some local sites. That, as you can imagine, Jack, it's highly fragmented. I think some of those are effective. I'm obviously not familiar with. You're talking about hundreds and hundreds of localized sites at that point. When you look at when we look at surveys or information or research that's published on the industry, the vast majority of bookings are coming off the big sites. So that tells me they're probably very effective. And I think based on your location, there may be some regional sites that can help you. But the big sites is always the place to start.
Mhm.
And, it's tough to say what the effectiveness is of some of these regional sites or even really be aware of them. But other than those kind of the big companies I listed on a national basis, I haven't seen lately really any big players coming. I mean, Google is entering the space like, Google enters everything, but I think they're really just, partnering with the big Airbnbs and Vrbos just to kind of promote that inventory in a different way.
Sure. Well, I always end our conversations with one last question. Is there any question you wished we would have covered or asked today?
No, I think we've had a good but pretty short conversation about the short-term rentals, the merits of it. The one thing I would say is, and I kind of touched on this earlier, if people are thinking about it, I mean, I was very nervous. I've been doing this for a long time, and I just jumped in with my one property. I was very nervous about it. I think you'll find people are thinking about it. It's easier than you think it's going to be.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing is guests. These guests, sometimes people worry about having these types of guests in their property. These guests are typically very respectful. They're very well behaved. I mean, I've been doing this for 20 years, and there's only one or two examples where I could say, oh, that was kind of a difficult guest interaction, or I had some issues with a guest. So it's easier than people may think it is.
Yeah, it's one of those things too that you and I chatted before the call that we were looking at this a couple times, and frankly, we haven't been able to get the numbers to work because of the in our area, just turning it over each time a tenant was through, it would chew up any cash flow that it would generate. So
yeah, I mean, some markets are going to be very strong for the short-term rentals. Some markets aren't. That's going to be kind of a market-driven function depending on where the property is located. And it doesn't necessarily mean it's one size fits all for wherever you are in the world.
Sure. Do you got any tips for travelers on the other side? Like what should a person look for, or red flags when they're looking at listings for their stay? I'm putting you on the spot now.
Yeah, no, it's fine. I mean, look, and this. I'm going to say it, and you say, well, that's really obvious, but it's when you start shopping these websites, listings that have great photos. I think that fair and accurate representation of the property is good. So, look at the photos, but also look at the reviews. Now, reviews, you can go through these sites and it feels like everyone now has 5-star reviews, but it's a good thing to look at. And there may be comments in there that say, hey, this was great, but, given the stair configuration of railings, I was really concerned about the toddler. I mean, you can pick up things like that when looking at the reviews. The other thing I would say is, depending on when you're booking, don't be shy. I mean, maybe ask for a discount or negotiate a little bit when you're using these sites. It never hurts to ask. And depending on if it's a last minute booking or late in the cycle, there can be a lot of negotiation and discounting that happens.
Yeah, I've been trying that myself. We've been, you've read the book, The Aladdin Factor? Just try to get into the habit of asking, because you'd be surprised how often you might get something a little extra or what have you.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, for my own property now, if someone's asking for a booking a year out, I'm probably going to say no, right? Because I'll eventually book it. But if it's, if it's 2 or 3 weeks out and it's not booked, I'm going to be willing. I'm not going to give it away, but I'm going to be willing to make a deal just to get some rent for that weekend. That's probably going to go unbooked. Absolutely.
Yeah, and you know what? I guess I would have never thought about that when booking an Airbnb or something. I just wouldn't have assumed that is something that could be done.
Yeah.
So
no, it's relatively common.
Yeah, it doesn't hurt to ask, right?
Exactly.
So, well, I really appreciate your time. Thank you for joining us. And where can everybody find you if they want more information or follow you?
Yeah, the best place is our website, which is MyLodgeTax.com. And we get information about our service, but if you click around, there's also resources, tax information by state. We have a free, kind of a cool tax rate lookup tool where if you're not sure what the requirements are, you can type in your address and it'll tell you what the tax rate is for your location. So it's our website, MyLodgeTax.com, and there's all kinds of information and resources. And we also have a 1-800 number. We're happy to pick up the phone and talk to people if they have more questions.
Do you dare give that phone number now?
I don't, this is embarrassing. I don't have it off the top of my head because it changes from time to time. But if you go to the website and hit contact us, it's there.
No, I completely get it. If you asked me right now what the phone number is on my webpage, I couldn't tell you either.
Right.
So sorry to put you on the spot, but I really appreciate your time. Thanks for chatting, and I hope we can do it again soon.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
We've put a lot of effort into providing useful content, and if you've found value in the show and have any interest in supporting us with a small donation, head over to patreon.com/housedudes.
And if you have any thoughts or questions, shoot us an email at info@housedudes.com. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter @housedudes. And if you like what you're hearing, head over to iTunes, subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. It really helps other investors out there find the show.
And remember, massive positive impact requires
massive positive action. We'll see you next time. This episode was brought to you by HouseDudes.com. Do you have time to actively manage flipping and rentals yourself? If so, go for it. If you live in a market that won't cash flow or don't have the time to do all the work, are you just out of luck? If there was a way to participate more passively, would that appeal to you? I'm sure you have questions about how the process works and what to do next. If that's the case, fill out the form on housedudes.com/investors, and we'll reach out to see if you are a good fit for our business. This is first come, first serve, and we will have to stop taking applications when our goals are met. See you at housedudes.com/investors.
I don't like to tell a man what to do with his money, but if you ain't investing in property, then you're dumber than a dummy.
I'm not dumb. I'm smart.
Well, buy property. That's my advice.